Pour cette parole d'acteur, on va passer à l'anglais. J'espère que ça vous va. Sentez-vous libre pendant la discussion de poser vos questions en français également, ou en arabe ou d'autres langues. On est plein ici à pouvoir traduire. Mais là, on va passer à l'anglais parce que I have the honor of introducing Omar Itani, who has traveled far and has had multiple difficulties, but has absolutely persisted on coming here despite trains breaking down, planes being delayed, and has rebooked his way 4 times to be here with us this afternoon. So Omar, thank you very, very much for making it. Omar Itani is the founder and general manager today of FabricAid, one of the Middle East's most influential textile and second-hand clothing redistribution platforms. And what started in 2017 as a student project has since developed into a full-blown company with over 80 staff members and several millions in turnover within the past 6 years. So FabricAid has built a model that collects locally donated clothing, upcycles used clothing at scale, and makes high-quality second-hand garments accessible both in Lebanon and in Jordan. And Omar will tell us more. Omar has been widely recognized for his social entrepreneurship and has won a very, very long series of awards and competitions, of which I will only name very few here. He's been named Forbes Middle East Under 30 honoree. He's been awarded the UN Environment Programme's Young Champion of the Earth Award, and he's the winner of the Global Social Venture Competition. Omar, thank you again. And I will immediately come to the first question. I wanted to ask, would you walk us just through the founding story of FabricAid? I guess, how did you come to the conclusion that Lebanon needed to act, needed a new model for second-hand clothing, and why clothing?
Sure. First, thank you so much for hosting me here. I'm very happy to be here after a very, very long commute. I'll tell you a bit about what we do and how things started. In the Arab world in general, and in Lebanon in particular, waste collection, as you've seen throughout the day, is very scattered and diversified. When it comes to clothing, the system and the model doesn't even exist. So in Lebanon, the vast majority of people, when they want to donate their clothes, they have one of 2 options. They would either give it to their janitor or to somebody they know personally in the community, or they would give it to a mosque, church, or a local NGO. My family follows the first option. They usually donate the clothes to the janitor in our building, and they've been doing that for more than 25 years. After coming back from the US, I wanted to donate my clothes in the same way my family does it. So I prepared my clothes, I ironed them, I cleaned them, and I delivered my clothing to the janitor. And just before leaving, I had a very organic question. What do you really benefit? And how do you really benefit from those clothes? He was a chubby guy, and I was even skinnier than today. And he said a word in Arabic that's called bdahwirun, which means I just get rid of them. And I realized that my parents and everybody in our building has been donating their clothes improperly or inefficiently for the past 25 years. And this is not only the situation of my family, but all across Lebanon. And even the NGOs and the mosques and the churches that collect clothes, the way they distribute them is in one of 2 different ways. Either they will put them in a big room and people will need to search in a pile of clothing to get what they need, which I don't think is a proper way of distributing clothes, or they would distribute clothes in the same way they distribute food packages. We all eat sugar, milk, we need bread, we need oil, but we don't all dress in the same way. We have different sizes, different colors, different preferences. And all across the Arab world, we treat food like clothing, so we distribute clothing parcels, which is also not an effective way to distribute clothes. And I was discovering those things, and that the vast majority of underprivileged communities in the Arab world do not rely on second-hand clothes donations. They rely on the second-hand clothing market, which is a market that has 80 million customers in the Arab world. To 0.5 million in Lebanon, around 30 million in Egypt, a staggering number, 4 million, around 4 to 5 million in Syria, 3 million in Jordan, huge populations. And the Arab world imports more than $1 billion worth of second-hand clothing every year, which really doesn't make sense. Why would we import a lot of second-hand clothes and then redistribute it to marginalized communities if we already buy first-hand clothes in huge, massive quantities? So just last statistics. Lebanon imports every year 17,000 tons of first-hand clothing. And it also imports 15,000 tons of second-hand clothing, which doesn't make sense. We can just recirculate the first-hand clothing into the second-hand market and have a locally sufficient system, which is much more competitive. And this is exactly what we do at FabricAid. We started very simple. We collect clothes from privileged communities. We have hundreds of clothing collection bins. We also have partnerships with the churches, with the mosques, with the NGOs, with fashion retail companies. We collect around 100,000 clothing articles in Lebanon alone every year, every month, sorry. And this cloth is cleaned, sanitized, and it ends up in our stores located in extremely marginalized areas. People can come to our stores, everything is hanged, neatly displayed, there's price tags, fitting rooms, personalized advice. People can choose whatever items they want at prices that they can actually afford without feeling that somebody is doing charity for them. And by prices that they can actually afford, we are talking about the average price per article at our store is less than $1. We sell every year around 1 million clothing items in Lebanon to more than 200,000 beneficiaries. This is basically the main thing we do at FabricAid. With the conversation, I can introduce the remaining elements of what we do.
Okay, thank you so much, Omar. So maybe I will hide kind of two questions in my next question, which is what you're not supposed to do as a moderator. Because when you spoke, I guess the first question that came to mind was many here in the room, of course, are aware of the kind of economic crisis that Lebanon has been living, economic meltdown, hyperinflation. So I guess my first question was, from the time you founded FabricAid 2017 to today, Lebanon has undergone dramatic changes, the economy has undergone dramatic changes, and this must have changed how people buy clothes, how they donate clothes, etc. So I guess my first question was a bit, how has FabricAid evolved throughout these changes? I leave it there.
Sure. Just to mention those challenges, in 2019, we had a huge revolution that toppled the government. And after that, we had a banking crisis and a massive devaluation for the Lebanese lira, which lost more than 99% of its value. The banking sector removed $160 billion of liquidity in the market and just trapped them in the banks. And then we had the biggest fires in the history of the country. And then we had Beirut blast, which killed around 200 people and destroyed a quarter of the city. And then it ended with the Israeli-Lebanese war that killed around 5,000 individuals and destroyed a big portion of the south of Lebanon. So, and all of this happened in the span of less than 5 years. Usually this trouble a nation passes through in 100 years. We did it in 5. And it not only changed the country, it literally changed every element of it. So, for example, a very simple idea that I can share with you. When we started the business, and I here emphasize on calling it a business, the target audience were basically a person who would work in construction, the people who would work in agriculture, people who would work in valet, people who would work in low-paying jobs. They would make $400, $500 per month. They have a family of 5, 6 people, so their capacity to purchase clothing is very limited. With now, the people we sell are also members in the public sector. 400,000 people in the public sector are our primary customers today because they make less than $300, $400 per month. At a certain point, they were making $80 per month. We also sell to teachers, to what our target was people living below poverty line and people making less than $3 a day. and this was around 1 million individuals, and overnight it became 2.5 million individuals. At a certain point, the demand was too high. We had to call the police so we can organize the lines leading into our stores. Especially during COVID, because we could only get 4 people at a store at a time. So we really needed police assistance to organize the lines. And at the same time, the reason the demand increased because of the economic crisis, but also the price of the second-hand clothes increased drastically, because second-hand clothes is important from Europe, and the wholesalers would pay in euro to buy it, and then they need to sell it in Lebanese pounds. So the price became also significantly higher, which increased the volume of our work drastically, and this is why we were able to grow relatively quite fast. But it also was incredibly challenging because of all what I mentioned.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's crazy how, in a way, right, you see the radical transformation of your customer base as a kind of mirror of some of the kind of socioeconomic upheavals, really, on the Lebanese market. I was wondering, you spoke already a little bit about the kind of circulations of imported second-hand clothing, right? There are a lot of people here in the room that have worked on kind of international, transnational circulations of waste from north to south, etc., including second-hand clothing. So I was wondering a bit, your social entrepreneurship model is one that focuses on local circulations. And so I was wondering a bit, what are the relations, I guess, between your model of circularity as a local one and these transnational circulations, but also between you coming in as a kind of business model, right? And then some of these other circulations that you talked about, markets like Suq al-Ahad, places like Naba'a, where there are already communities, right, working. It's also very important, we're talking about work, very important work, source of work, especially often for refugee communities like Syrian refugees. So I wanted to ask a bit, what is the relation? Is there a relation? Is there tension, or is there convergence? Or how do you see this?
So in Lebanon, also before the collapse of the Lebanese currency, we had an estimated 300 second-hand stores, second-hand clothing stores. By the end of the collapse, so currently, we have around 2,000 stores. So the number was multiplied by a factor of nearly 10. So yes, there is a massive market for second-hand clothing, which, as I mentioned, became significantly more expensive. And the second-hand market in Lebanon is not an exception. In Egypt, there is a massive second-hand market, in central Cairo, also in Jordan, Suq al-Jum'ah. So the second-hand market exists, but today the way it gets its supply is genuinely and honestly one of the most racist and improper systems, simply because some of the terminology is used. So if the quality of clothing is good, it's called cream. If the quality of clothing is bad, and this is internationally, like when you work with suppliers, if it's the quality is good, it's called cream, and if it's the quality is bad, it's called Pakistan. And it's graded, and there are certain grades that go to certain countries and certain grades that don't go to other countries, and it's pure waste dumping. So today, if you go to a country like Chile, you can hover in a helicopter for 10 minutes and see a landfill full of textile waste. A similar landfill exists in Jordan. A similar landfill exists in Uganda, in Angola. So there is a massive amount of second-hand clothes that is delivered into the global south. And why and how does this happen? Let's take the example of Le Relais, which is French. I don't know if I'm mentioning the name properly. But Le Relais would basically collect through bins they have all over the city. The top 20%, they will sell them to middle-class communities inside Europe. And usually the type of clothing they would sell is the best quality of clothing. Then everything else goes to something called a textile reclaimer, TRs. The TRs would take the bottom 30% and try to recycle them or technically downcycle them. So they shred them, they create insulation panels, insulation boards from them. And the remaining 50%, is sold to wholesalers in receiving countries. And you cannot buy but in bulk, but in big quantities, and you cannot buy the categories you want, and that's a very important issue. So if I want male clothing, I want 4 tons of male clothing, I will need to buy 12 tons of unneeded female clothing that I don't really need, but I'm pushed to do that, otherwise they wouldn't send it to me. So you have to buy in bulk things you need and things you don't need, and this is the rules and the policies of the system. And then the wholesaler would receive them, and the wholesaler will sell them to second-hand shops. But since you are already overbuying, you have a lot of waste in the system. And this system has several issues. One, so much waste. Second, is the price of item being sold in the receiving country is relatively expensive, because you have the textile reclaimer in Europe, you have the wholesaler in the receiving country, the second-hand shop in the receiving country, customs, shipping, and sometimes also an NGO involved that make money out of every item being sold. So you have a lot of middlemen, which makes second-hand clothing expensive. And the way they are sold is another issue. So you mentioned Naba, you mentioned Burj Hamoud, Suq al-Ahad. So in those stores, there's no fitting rooms. Those stores, there's no cleanliness. A small percentage of the clothing is actually hanged. The smell, the experience, there's a lot of haggling. So you would never go into one of the second-hand shop and see like a price on an item. There's always this conversation. There's also always exceptions, of course, but it's also not a very safe place for women and children. So what we try to do is one, create a shopping experience that has nothing to do with the shopping experience that people who buy second-hand are usually see. So our stores are all like in very well built, very well renovated. There's fitting rooms, there is air conditioning, 24/7 electricity, cameras, personalized shoppers, stylists. Every item is ironed. So we focus a lot on the shopping experience, and this is what sets us apart. And of course, the price. The jeans that we sell for $2, for example, the second-hand market sells for $6 to $8. So there's a massive difference in price. And because we don't want to take anyone out of the business, we never open in an area that has other second-hand shops. This is the number one rule, and we never open in areas that have, like on highways or areas where a lot of cars can pass. We open inside the middle of cadastres of poverty. So inside refugee camps, inside of areas that people deem unsafe. But because what we care about is that the people in this neighborhood get the opportunity to buy decent clothing at affordable prices. So yes.
So I guess 2 reactions from my side, and then I'm quite happy also to open it up because there's been a lot of listening and not much chance for our audience to speak. Maybe just 2 quick follow-ups. So I guess my first direct question would be, don't you get in trouble because you are very, very fierce competition, right? So there are already people on this market, from wholesalers to retailers to the kind of informal vendors, and you're very fierce competition and your prices cut the market prices. So I guess I was just interested in that kind of competition element. And then I was wondering, and this is a kind of broader question, you weren't with us today, but I think we spoke a lot about kind of these transnational hierarchies in, between countries that you talked about in these global geographies of waste circulation. But one thing we didn't speak much about, and I think Soraya made a comment about this in the panel before, was a bit this question, well, what happens when waste is not a resource and you can't scale, or you can't make profits out of it and they become a problem. So it's a bit for you to come back to this question of entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurship, and a bit the role from your point of view of social entrepreneurship in relation to this kind of waste issue, right? This surplus issue, this waste issue. Why is it important, right? Most of us here are researchers. We know very little about business. So I guess from your perspective, as one of the few people probably here who is actually running a scalable business, can you say a little bit more about how you see the role of entrepreneurship?
The reason the fierce competition has not turned into death threats yet is simply because we control today, or we have around 6 to 8% of the market. So we haven't taken anyone out of sight of the market. Of course, we're a competitor. Every other competitor has 1%, 0.5%. It's a very fragmented market. So yes, we are a big player, but still our percentage is quite small. And what we try to do as much as possible is to become we know that a certain amount of clothing will continue to need to be imported from outside. This is a fact. But of course not at the volumes we currently have, because this is not sustainable. But we are working a lot today with wholesalers, with second-hand shops, on several programs. So one of the main programs we have, and this is why we have a relatively good relation with wholesalers, all of the waste they have, so they have huge amounts of clothes that they cannot end up selling. So we take that from them for a very symbolic price, but we help them to get rid of those items, and we upcycle them. So we have a factory that has like a full machinery that takes basically second-hand clothing, and this is where 70% of our income comes, and how we really are the continuation of the system. 70% of our income comes actually from working with wholesalers, with the second-hand shops, with our own shops, and taking second-hand clothes that is damaged, that is overconsumed, or simply undesired. If you today donate a Tom Ford suit, it's very hard for us to sell it, even if it's a $2,000 suit, because marginalized communities don't tend to use suits. A Florin pink dress, even if it's Dolce & Gabbana, it's very hard for us to sell it. Unless we take it to vintage stores. So this quality and this type of clothing ends up being upcycled into corporate merchandise. And companies like Qatar Airlines, PwC, Deloitte, Carrefour, Majid Al Futtaim, we have a couple of hundred customers where we create their merchandise made of second-hand clothes. And this allowed us to have a good relationship with the existing players, because we are the way they get rid of their own waste. So yes, we are competing, but we are also in a way completing the cycle and the circularity of the system.
So, I mean, I have 50 more questions, but if there are questions from the audience, I'd give you preference. Feel free to ask in French, as we said, or in any language you like, and we can also translate. Are there any questions?
Hi, thank you for your talk. My question is around Dubai. Could you talk about the role of Dubai in this circulation of markets? Because I've been there and I saw that textile is one of the big goods that is circulated from that market. And the other thing you mentioned, Al Futtaim. So I just want to know, like, how is what is Al Futtaim doing in the second hand?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
So Dubai and Tunisia, Romania, those countries became a massive hub for sorting. So most of the clothes that is collected in Europe is not sorted in Europe. Logoli is one example. There's initial sorting that happens here, very top line, where they take the top percentage of items to sell them in local vintage stores. Everything remaining, when I mentioned the word textile reclaimers, they are predominantly in Eastern European countries. Tunisia is a big hub. Dubai, because of very smart legislation, is a big hub. The reason those places became hub because of custom codes that allow you to import second-hand clothes and then transit them outside of the country without paying any taxes. And you sort in those countries because you are benefiting from low labor cost, low energy cost. So it's not Dubai in particular, it's Sharjah. Sharjah is the hub for sorting, technically worldwide. They have massive warehouses. If you are in the free zones of Sharjah, we don't have really good percentages. We don't know the exact number, but something of around 10 to 15% of the global second-hand clothes are sorted in literally Sharjah, Al Ain, a couple of the Emirates. This is basically the role of those areas. There's a massive company in Tunisia, huge. They also have like a couple of percentage points from the African market. There's a lot of sorting that happens in Ghana also, and in Laos. This is regarding internationally. With Majid Al-Futtaim and the companies that I mentioned, those are definitely companies not in the second-hand market, but they buy massive amounts of corporate merchandise. And corporate merchandise is also a huge polluter, because canvas and all of the materials that are used to create tote bags, to create even things like this, we manufacture them made from second-hand clothes at much lower prices in a much more sustainable way. So we work with them on, and with their CSR department on creating merchandise for them and for many other corporations. But they are not in the second-hand market. One thing I would add about that, if you're familiar with the Arab world, all the famous fast fashion companies in Europe are basically owned by one of three companies, either Azadiyah, Shaya, or Futtaim. Those three companies control Zara, all of Inditex, control Mango, control H&M. They are the franchisers in like 30, 40 countries. And we have partnerships with all three companies, and one of them is now considering a substantial investment or a joint venture with us to open up in Iraq. The second-hand market is the second lowest segment in the fashion industry. So it's the reason I focus on mentioning that we are a business is that the only way we can really solve the second-hand clothing crisis is by injecting massive amounts of capital in it, and technology, and talent. And in order to do that, you either need a public sector that is extremely robust, very much focused on the situation, and is willing to put hundreds of millions of dollars, or you need to allow the private sector to resolve it in a way that is regulated, because you don't want it to become a very capitalistic endeavor and it becomes very expensive for marginalized communities. So I really see that social enterprises, we are not running blood banks or hospitals or education, which should be completely for free, in my opinion. But we are running stores for clothing, and those can have a symbolic price. So really, in particular, when it comes to clothing, plastic, glass, social enterprises should be the prime go-to for such solutions. And we need to create the legal framework and the investment framework to allow them to gather capital and implement their solutions in a sustainable way.
Yeah. I just wanted to add like a funny anecdote about Sharjah, like because in Tunis today, so Tunis, as you said, is like a massive sorting hub, but the quality has declined on the Tunisian market. And as Omar was saying, there's really competition, right, on a global market because it's a massive growth market. And so with Emmanuelle, we were talking already about this competition between Morocco and Tunisia. So Morocco is kind of trying to get a part of the Tunisian business towards Africa. But then also in Tunis today, there's this whole thing about the crème. Where has the crème gone? والكريمة مشيت والكريمة مشيت وين مشيت العمارات ومشيت الشارقة. So Sharqa is like the kind of place where all the crème is going. So I just wanted to mention that because it's really these kind of geographies on this growth market, right, that are evolving over time.
Yeah, so we talked a bit about competition. How do you think about scaling in the Middle East, and what would you say are the main hurdles when applying your model beyond Lebanon, cultural or others?
So we are currently in two markets. We are in the Jordanian market and in the Lebanese market. And with the Egyptian Clothing Bank, we are opening up in Egypt in 2 months. We'll have the first stores opening up there. And actually, you mentioned that somebody is from Manshiyat Nasser, which is Hayy so one of our first stores, inshallah, will be there. So we'll definitely have a conversation after this panel. There is a lot of difficulties. The main difficulty is the investment framework. Today, if you are a tech startup in the Arab world, you can go to WAMDA, EVP, you can go to those big investment firms, Mubadala, STC, predominantly in Egypt, Saudi, and the Emirates. Some of them are also in Doha, Qatar, and you can get an investment to scale your technology or your startup. If you are a social enterprise, a good 95% of the Arab world doesn't know what a social enterprise is. And not only ordinary people, we are talking about investors in the Arab world that do not know what a social enterprise is. And for us, if an investment would come with an obvious solution or a way we can scale and create more revenues, Since the market is selling Aegeans for $6 to $8 and we sell it for less than $2, if we sell it for $2.5 or $3, we can create more revenues and more profits for the company. We are very keen on our pricing system. And for any normal investor, would come and be like, okay, I would invest, but I need you to optimize, to change the way you price, the way you sell. The stores do not need this inventory, this renovation budget, this service budget. So finding investors who understand the difference between, understand how to invest in impact investments, especially the tech investments mature usually after 7 years. In our cases, it's still hard to tell, but social enterprises, even in the Indian or Bangladeshi context, which is more developed in particular in social enterprises, they mature after 10 to 12 years. So capital really needs to be patient. And finding that such investors is a big challenge. So securing the capital would be the first challenge. Legislation is another. Today in Lebanon and in Jordan, we are registered in the same way a bank is registered. And we pay the same taxes. We pay massive custom and duties. VAT, Social Security, especially in a country like Jordan where it's very expensive to operate a business. So legal framework, there's a lot of exemptions for a tech startup in, for example, Jordan or in Egypt. 0 exemptions for a circular startup or a social startup. So I think the legal framework and the capital, and there's a third, which is very common for any business trying to expand in the MENA region. It's not like the European Union. Each and every country in Europe has a specific identity, its specific customers, but there's a lot of similarities. In the Arab world, no. There is a different currency in every market, different custom code in every market, different banking system, legal legislation. It's very easy to hire and fire in Lebanon, very hard to fire in Jordan. Easy to hire and fire in Egypt, very easy to do registration and tax coding in Lebanon, very hard in Jordan. So each country has its time for you to understand it. And the communities are very different. So yes, maybe Lebanon and Jordan, to a certain extent, Egypt is similar. Tunisia is very different. Morocco is very different. We're talking between, it's easier to go from Beirut to Paris than to go from Beirut to Tunis. Even logistically, the flights, the number of flights, the number of hours it takes. So the Arab world is not connected. That's the reality of expanding a company in the Arab world.
Okay. And just quickly, do you think so? It's a matter of like the VC growth ecosystem, like realizing that there are companies like this that need capital as well. So it's just a matter of time, maybe, and maturity, I guess. Okay.
100%. And we see it growing. We see more impact. Like now, there is an impact fund that was just created. 2 impact funds that actually invested in us. Arab impact funds. One is called Al Fanar. One is an Arab European fund called Globivest. Impact funds 5 years ago didn't exist in the Arab world. It just didn't exist. People didn't know what an impact fund is. So we're starting to see that. Also great examples of incredibly successful social enterprises in India and in Bangladesh show that there's a case. Social enterprises can be very profitable.
Thank you.
I was interested actually in this question of, I mean, we're talking again about a growth market, about scaling, and I was kind of wondering how do these predictions, right, that the second-hand clothing market is going to grow faster than the fast fashion market, for example, how are they also a threat for you as a social entrepreneur? Because you made rightfully the difference, right, in kind of circular economy. There are the kind of big players can also go into kind of circular economy initiatives that then become very quickly kind of CSR, corporate social responsibility policies, etc. And I guess how dangerous is this also that smaller actors, in a way, and social entrepreneurs might get marginalized on this market because larger corporate actors are actually going to determine how this market is going to evolve?
There is, in having big companies like Shaya, Azadea, even Inditex Group is putting a massive budget on going into the second-hand stores. Now there's a second-hand Zara store in Spain. So Zara is opening its own second-hand stores. So we see a lot of investment in circularity. Some of them will disrupt the market. It's still not very clear how and in what way. But also for us, I see that as a massive opportunity. Shaya would go into the second-hand market, and they want to go into the second-hand market, and Azadea wants to do that too. But they cannot go using their current talent and their current system and their current overhead. It's a very expensive way to operate a second-hand concept that sells an item for $1. So they need to do it in very different ways. And this is an opportunity for us. We can use their capital for them to go into the second-hand market, but in the rules and the ways we operate. So we hope that this would expand our growth. And if it will be a competition, let it be a competition.
Thank you so much, Omar, for being with us despite all the hurdles, and بألف توفيق with the company. Thank you all.